In a modest, mundane way, this is simply how a community binds itself together. But in the doggedness, there is something bigger and more beautiful than the 30 people in the swimming hall. When I do get in the water, I find that the swim is something that largely takes place in my head. I settle in, and eventually I notice things. At 2 kilometers, I watch the elementary school headmaster in the next lane haul himself out and head to work. The fish meal. Oh, at 3 kilometers, I smell fish when Svenny opens the outside door. The fish meal factory is up and running for the day. At 4 kilometers, the sun has risen enough so that it starts to filter through the skylights and side windows, a glorious late winter lemon yellow. It plays across the lanes and down into the water where I swim. At 5 kilometers, I start feeling giddy. I am reminded of the warning posted by the hot pools. Caution, excessive use of hot tubs may cause dysphoria. With 8 laps to go, I poke my head up and do the breaststroke, double-checking my distance with Alan, who's counting my laps. I finish with 1 lap each of butterfly, backstroke, breaststroke, and freestyle, just to mix it up, just to show that I am still in good form. An hour and 50 minutes after I begin, I'm done. I text Goodliger to let him know that I have completed the swim in his honor. It gives me great pleasure to be able to do this. He calls me from work to caution me, in an avuncular way, to make sure I get some rest. It is a long swim after all, he says. I think about how surreal it is that he's the one telling me that. Then I walk back through the snow to my hotel and take a nap. Visiting the Icelandic coast, contemplating the sea from the perch of a pool. It is swimming as liturgy. The rite of swimming enables us to endure many things through a communal call and response of story as well as practice. I believe in the power of how we pass down that tradition. In many ways, swimming and family were intertwined for me from the start. It's my own origin story. In the summer of 1968, my parents met in a swimming pool in Hong Kong. For one hot moment, they were the cliché incarnate. He was the bronze lifeguard. She was the bikini-clad beauty with long black hair and big, serious eyes. When I flip through snapshots of that time, I can hardly bear their prettiness, their slim-limbed stances, the way they looked at each other with such longing. Such longing, of course, rarely lasts. That they stayed married as many years as they did until my older brother and I were safely in college is complicated by periods of living apart, blowout fights, silent treatments. The only things they had in common, it seemed, were their youthful looks, us kids, and swimming. People who know my brother and me laugh when we tell them our parents met at the pool. We began to swim at ages 6 and 5 at the outdoor recreation center near our home on Long Island. As a precursor to a life in the water, the final mileage not yet marked, I spent summer mornings taking lessons with Andy while our mother swam laps in the next lane. Her favorite stroke was breaststroke. As we paddled alongside, we could see her head popping up for breath at regular intervals, her legs executing a powerful frog kick under the calm surface. In the afternoons, my father would sometimes join us, and we'd head down to Jones Beach. We drove the 8 miles along the causeway from our house, leapfrogging across the little islands in the bay that separate fish-shaped Long Island from the skinny barrier island that is the beach. On the other side of that barrier island was the vast, viridian green expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. We rolled down the windows and let the sea air blast through our eggshell-colored 1978 Volvo station wagon. During low tide, we pinched our noses against the stink that rose from the exposed mudflats below. Most visits, my mother and father would begin with a jog alone together by the water's edge. At the end of the run, they'd jump into the ocean, and my father would finish with a solo swim beyond the shore break. This was his comfort zone. Every stroke pulled him further from us, back in time to the days spent free diving and spearfishing with his father and brother off the subtropical beaches of Hong Kong Island. My mother would come back and sit on the towel, and we'd look up every now and again, shading our eyes, searching out my father's splashing figure in the waves. Swimming out there was a grown-up thing. Each year, I hopefully inched closer and closer to it. I kind of want to skip to the end of this section of the book and just say that when we swim, the reasons we do so, we start with survival, which is so acutely, it's about life and death. And I tell the story of my parents and my family relationship with swimming to kind of lead into this next section of well-being and community and competition and flow, because, we evolve, and why we swim does too. And so we swim for survival of different kinds. And so this passage, I think Eliza wanted me to read it because it reflects some of the journalism, but also sort of the memoir and the sense of swimming being an expansive way to talk about our relationship with the water and with life.
Thank you, Bonnie. And yes, that's exactly why I hoped you would read that passage. This is one of those wonderful nonfiction books that combines elements of journalism and memoir, and you will learn so much, but there's also a real kind of emotional pull to it. So very engaging. Well, I want to ask you a question based on that passage. And there's a line that I just love in that bit that you just read. You mentioned swimming as liturgy. And that reminds me of something that comes up a few times in the book. Swimming as a religious experience, or swimming as religion. And I was hoping that you could elaborate on that. Why do you think that so many people talk about swimming in these holy terms?
I think it is, well, you just made me think of another swimmer who I spent time with for the book, Kim Chambers, and she was the first woman to swim from the Farallones, 30 miles off the coast of San Francisco to San Francisco. She was the first woman to do that solo. And she always talked about how when she goes into the open water of San Francisco Bay and goes swimming, every morning she would do it, and it was her church, she said. And I think for her specifically, because swimming was a way for her to heal after almost losing her leg to, in a terrible fall that, she had an accident and she almost lost her leg, and swimming was a way to rehab and kind of come back to her body and understand that life could carry on after something so terrible. And I think the water, and specifically open water, being, lakes in the ocean and streams and rivers, the expansiveness of that, the sort of wildness of that, and the intimacy with nature, feeling untethered. I think you have to sort of trust in your abilities. You learn how to swim, you learn how to conduct yourself in it safely. And then it's a way to kind of explore. And I think that when you are out, especially in the ocean or in a bay where, you have to be attentive to the details of the natural world. And, maybe it's birds and marine life and the currents and the temperature of the water and kind of being safe in that. And I think that the rhythm of that, the fact that it's a changing environment all the time, and how you respond to that, and you can't help but be attentive to what's going on with yourself and in the world, and then the sort of relationship you have with that. And I think it's holy because, not in I think so much of the sort of ritual of religion is about having a moment to, think about what is important to you, your relationships, your community, and also caring about the world, right? It's about love. It's about, having a place to go and commune with, something that's bigger than yourself. And I think you can't help but feel that when you're swimming in open water. And so I think that provides a spiritual practice for people who may not necessarily be seeking out formal religion, but I think that anyone who really swims with a daily practice will think of it in that way.
Absolutely. Early on in the book, there's a line that resonated with me as the parent of a young child who's learning how to swim, or at least getting used to the water, not learning how to swim. And you write, "I know now what it is like to be a parent, watching my own young sons learn to swim and experiment by the water. Then as now, the states of swimming and drowning are terrifyingly, thrillingly porous. It remains that way no matter how well we have mastered the skill." You have taken some remarkable swims in your research for this book and in your life. And I just wondered if you could tell us about some of those swims kind of in the context of that passage. And have you ever felt like you were you were on that line. Have you been terrified on swims before?
Absolutely. I mean, I think back to I'm so glad you brought up that passage because I think about it so often. One of my earliest memories is being at Jones Beach in Long Island in New York, and being so excited to be like jumping in the waves and body surfing with my brother and my cousins, and as the water, and there's a passage in the early part of the book about that where the wave comes and then everyone's just like this, you're one organism kind of, you feel that surging. And to be a kid, I think that when we're children especially, we love that sort of push pull of the water. It's such a funny feeling, and even as adults we love it too, but because it's so sensory, it's so different from what it is to be on land and gravity, and you're being buoyed instead, and there's a force that surrounds you and kind of picks you up, then you can kind of move around in it. And I remember being knocked over by a wave and completely losing my bearings. I couldn't really see, and I was for that, I mean, I was probably like 5 seconds, but it felt like an eternity where I just was running out of air and I didn't know which way was up, and you can kind of feel your lungs kind of start burning and bursting. And then my cousin kicked me in the head, and I came up and I knew where I was. But it was this funny feeling that I had, which was I was sort of embarrassed. Like I looked around to make sure like no one noticed, even though there was like a fear, but it was like I hadn't quite learned how to understand this porousness, that I could have died. And now, of course, as an adult and having had all these swims under my belt over the course of 40 years, that I know the dangers of the currents and the temperature of the water, and again, being in water that's outside of a swimming pool is just, it's not a controlled environment, and you always have to know that. And now when I look at my kids doing that, I am so excited for them. They have the same joy, and they're seeking that sensory feedback, and it's so wonderful. But I always am aware of like the dangers, and I'm so vocal about them. I've been swimming out. I did this great swim from Alcatraz to San Francisco. And it's that I always wanted to do that swim. I mean, I'm not a huge open water swimmer. I've never wanted to swim the English Channel, but I understand the impulse to be out there and to conquer something. In my small way, I thought, okay, I could do the Alcatraz swim, and it's so iconic, it's so storied. There's so much great mythology behind it. And Alcatraz being this island prison, the currents being sucking in and out of San Francisco Bay, being so terrifying, and no one ever was recorded as being a successful escapee while it was a prison, federal prison. And but now of course we know so much about how to conduct ourselves safely with the currents and the changing tides, and you have boat chaperones to swim, and it's relatively safe if you are prepared. And still, I remember jumping in at Alcatraz, and I had prepared for this. I was doing the swim with friends, and the cold water just like sucked all the air out of me and just pressure on my chest. And then I relax. I remember to relax, and I start swimming, and it's just amazing. You're seeing the Golden Gate Bridge from this perspective. You see the island, you see San Francisco, you hear people talking, you hear the birds. And then I hit a patch of seaweed, but when you're swimming and you hit something, you think, you can't see anything underwater, you think immediately, you can't stop your body from rearing back and reacting in this like instinctive way, because there's a lot to fear out there, and we are programmed to respond to it for a reason. And so even if we're being, in this modern day, we still fight certain impulses and instincts that we have to be able to risk and do things that we normally would not have in the past, in our sort of evolutionary past. But I find that exhilarating. I find that I don't play around too close to that line, because I have a healthy respect for it, but I do find it interesting to kind of dance close to it.
Yeah. Just as an aside, as someone who's lived her whole life in a landlocked state, it was fascinating to me how, well, first just reading about open water swimming, which is not something that a whole lot of Arkansans have a lot of experience with. unless we're swimming in lakes, which people do. But also how frequently you and others swim with sharks, and how having sharks in the water with you is normal.
Normal. It is normal. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about sharks lately, um, just because I'm writing a story that has to do with sharks right now. And so it is something that has taken over like our cultural consciousness, is this like touchstone, because of Jaws, and it's just
Right.
really over the last 50 years, that's been something that, many of us, when we go in any body of water, even though we know that there are no sharks there, it's it's a stand-in for all these things that we fear about the unknown, I think, and what we can't see. I just find that really fascinating.
Um, so you touched on this a little bit earlier, but one thing I just found really interesting about the book was how you write about how the body responds to water in different ways, and especially cold water, and different bodies seem to be kind of programmed to respond in more favorable ways, like
Uh-huh.
goater. And I wondered if you were surprised by any of your research and kind of what our bodies can do.
I was. I mean, the weirdest thing that I discovered was that we have two kinds of fat as mammals. I mean, I didn't know anything about brown fat. I would like to know if anyone who's here today knows about brown fat and knew about it, because I did not before I started researching.
Mm-mm.
Okay, brown fat. So uh, when I started swimming with these cold water swimming enthusiasts, and I asked some of them, because they seem to be relatively fine with no wetsuit in like 50-degree water swimming around. Like they were not shaking or pre-hypothermic or anything. And I said, do you think some bodies do better than others? Because often you would also see people, it wasn't that they had a lot of fat. They were not big people. They were normal looking people who, body types of all sorts, who would be, swimming out there. And I just wondered, like, how is it that you can maintain, an internal stable body temperature? How can you tolerate that? And so I learned about brown fat, which is, so mammals are born with two kinds of fat. White fat, which we are familiar with, it stores energy, um, and brown fat, which um, burns energy. It creates heat energy. And so babies apparently have a lot of brown fat sort of around their neck and sort of back region, because they don't have enough muscle tone to shiver when they're cold. And so this fat sort of draped around them helps to keep them warm. Now, as you grow older, you start to lose your brown fat. But what can happen is that there's a browning. You can brown your existing white fat into what's called beige fat. So again, like cells that are rich in mitochondria, like 30% mitochondria or something. And so they they produce heat energy. And so it's very early days of research, but they do know that certain things cause the browning of fat. That includes cold exposure, so, cold water immersion, and exercise. So, sort of it makes sense that if you are swimming in cold water as a regular practice, sort of over time you're adapting, and you could be generating a browning effect on your white fat, and that your metabolism speeds up and your dopamine levels go up. And so we know a lot of things like that. And again, like it's not clear what all the pathways and the effects are, but we know that much. And I just found that so interesting, because it makes sense that I did a bunch of no wetsuit open water swims in the dead of winter here in the Bay Area. And the first time I did it, I was shaking uncontrollably by the end. And sort of the successive few times that I followed up, I would swim for longer, and I did not have that response. And the water temperature was not appreciably warmer or colder. And so I just got a taste of how adaptable we still are to so many environmental conditions that we don't even know that we can actually do quite well in.
Talking about your when you did your first open water swim without a wetsuit, it was something that hadn't occurred to me before, but it was interesting to read about how the risk was not so much hypothermia in the water. And you write about how you, like, it's very shocking when you get in and then you kind of get used to it and get your rhythm. And then the bigger concern is what happens after you get out of the water. And
Right. Because you're not really, you feel good, you feel fine. You know, you're not entering a hypothermic state. But a lot of people who they've documented cases in which cold water swimmers will, you know, do a race or a swim or a competition or something, and they get out, and if they aren't immediately taking care of themselves, warming up gradually, their body temperature will continue to drop, and so then they can then, you know, enter a hypothermia, sort of a enter into a dangerous level of hypothermia instead of just sort of like mild hypothermia, so where they, you know, their body cools to a dangerous level. So it was, it's not that you get out and you're fine and don't feel cold, but because your blood continues to circulate, and then as the blood kind of, you know, returns from your extremities to your core and circulates around, then it can cool down your core body temperature.
So, and now tell me again, what would be, when you're swimming in winter in the Bay Area, what is the outdoor temperature?
Well, it could be like 50,
Yeah.
or, you know, high 40s. And the water could be around that same, you know, temperature. Yeah, it just depends.
Like I said, to my knowledge, we do not have a culture of open water swimming, particularly lots of lake swimming in the summer, but certainly not in the winter. And I found it a little inspiring to read what he did, and also made me think, like, maybe there would be an opportunity to try to replicate this.
Yeah, for sure. And you could certainly do it with a wetsuit.
Right.
There's no shame in a wetsuit, let me tell you.
Well, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So one chapter that I found fascinating was when you talk about the history of backyard swimming pools. And I'll quote a little bit. As you write, backyard pools were installed because their owners wanted to turn inward and privilege family over community, while more and more of America's numerous public pools, which provided for everyone else, were closed due to lack of use and disrepair in the era where you're writing about. And reading this, I felt a sense of pride, because here in Little Rock, I have what I would consider to be an exceptional public pool that is funded by taxpayers, and it provides swimming lessons, and I think it makes swimming fairly accessible in the heart of the city, which is great. But I also felt a real sense of sadness because the pool has been closed for the entire pandemic. And I certainly appreciate their precaution, but living in a landlocked state, like I said, we just don't have a lot of opportunities here to get in the water if you don't have a backyard pool or belong to a private club. So this is a very long-winded lead up to me asking you, how do you think the pandemic will affect, kind of in the long run, and is affecting accessibility to swimming? And then I know you've done a little bit of reporting on this, not in the book, obviously, because of the timing, but elsewhere, maybe in the New York Times. Is it possible to safely reopen a public pool right now?
Yes, it is. So I've written about public pools reopening across the country, and I kind of did this anatomy of a public pool, you know, reopening here during pandemic, nearby, here in the East Bay of San Francisco Bay Area. And it's certainly possible to do it, and communities are doing it. What I learned, though, that was sort of the sad and bleak part about it, is that pretty much every municipal pool runs at a deficit, even in non-pandemic times. So it's so great to hear that you have this wonderful, you know, public funded swimming pool that is accessible to all, and except in this time, of course. But even so, even when a public pool has like a healthy budget and healthy roster of programs, it is never really running at like a huge profit. You know, they've got to staff, um, you know, not only lifeguards but like aquatics supervisors and management, and you know, staff to maintain, and all of the programming, of course, that happens. They have to, you know, make sure that everything is done safely, and providing all of the services to like the huge sweep of community, right? From like the little kids and the learn to swim programs, and all of the supervision that entails, to like aqua aerobics classes, to like a, you know, maybe a warm therapy pool for you know, seniors and people who are recovering and rehabbing from, you know. So it's a huge, or a lap, and then a lap pool for like kid swim team. Maybe it's like a master's program for grown-ups. It's all, maybe it's like all the sports teams, other aquatic sports like water polo, that could be using the pool. And it's a lot to do, and there's so many needs. And to, in this time, especially with, you know, COVID, that it's very hard to safely distance pool use. And so basically, like, it's easy to do something like lap swimming where you have like one person per lane and you have reservation. You do it by reservation, but then you serve such a tiny slice of your community. And so what I'm finding is that the kids programming, like, you know, swim team, my two kids, I mean, I know this because my kids are 7 and 10, and they would normally be on swim team. They haven't been on swim team since March. You know, they don't get the regular exercise that they love, and their community. And I know from going to the pool every day, pretty much, that, you know, I don't see like the ladies in the locker room who I see every morning for the 8 a.m. aerobics class, you know, water aerobics class, and they so, you know, what I, you know, in our locker room, it's like a very intimate, lovely space where you're kind of on top of each other. But because of that, you know people, and you meet people, and you have conversations, and that are just sort of like glancing, incidental conversations. But you understand, you come to understand that how much the pool and the community means to those people, and how much it is, in, you know, essential to their health, you know, to their well-being. And it's not just the physical activity, it is, you know, the being able to do that pain-free, being able to do it supported by the water, being able to do that supported by your community. So it's a really, I feel that profound loss. And I also know from having talked to a bunch of different community pools and the people who manage them now, that many of them are not going to be able to reopen even after the pandemic is over, because they have lost now months and months of, you know, the money that people would pay to go use the pool, and then also they've let go of all of their staff, and it's just, you know, and then the budget shortfalls kind of keep spiraling in the community itself, like with the, you know, the local government, and they're not necessarily going to prioritize that pool reopening anytime soon. And so, you know, even here, I you know, in the book, I talk about how, you know, within a several mile radius of my where I live, there's so many public pools, and only one of them right now is open.
Oh,
Yeah, and so that goes to tell you that, yeah, it's so hard. It's really, really hard.
it is very hard and it's sad. And I reading the book was like a balm because it made me remember everything I love about swimming, but it's also sad because
Yeah,
you miss
yeah,
it.
yeah. I definitely never could have imagined that this book would come out. This book came out in April, that it would come out during a time when no one could go swimming. Like, and I have gotten these, on the one hand, I've gotten these wonderful, beautiful letters from people. You know, they've had the time to think about what maybe they wouldn't have thought about in this way, what it means to them, how essential it is to their well-being in their lives, and their, you know, how that they can get through things in life. And so it's so sad to receive those letters, And then I've also gotten letters from people who said they couldn't read the book until their pool reopened and they could go swimming again. And then I get these letters that are like joyous, like I saved it until I can get in the water, and then now I'm reading it. And so they were able to, I mean, I don't think, to be quite honest, I don't think I could have read my own book if I wasn't swimming, for sure. So I really appreciate the people who've reached out and connected, because I think right now we just need that communion more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a lot of joy in this book. Speaking of people who feel joyous getting back in the pool and reading it. And that's a good segue to another passage I was hoping that you would read. And then I think we've got one question, and I encourage folks to think about what questions you'd like to ask and post them in the Q&A, and we'll get to those in just a couple minutes. But you return frequently to the idea of swimming as freedom, and you write about flow. And to me, these two things are connected. We feel free when we enter a state of flow. I was hoping that you could read a passage elaborating on what you mean by flow.
Absolutely. I will read just the first two pages of the final section of the book, which is called Flow. And there's an epigraph that I actually really love by D.H. Lawrence that starts, water is H2O, hydrogen 2 parts, oxygen 1. But there's also a third thing that makes it water, and nobody knows what it is. And it's from D.H. Lawrence's poem, The Third Thing. And I love that so much, because as much as you can know what it is intellectually, there's something about that's elusive about describing what the experience of water is like. And I thought that was a perfect way to start off the flow section of the book. It's in the opening pages of Moby Dick. Yes, as everyone knows, Ishmael declares, meditation and water are wedded forever. Here at the novel's beginning, Ishmael calls our attention to the crowds of dreamy water gazers gathered along the shores of Manhattan on a Sabbath afternoon. See all those people leaning over ever so far. They prove him right. The ocean's liquid fingers have a way of transfixing us in thought. Ishmael points out that the ancient Persians call the sea holy, that the Greeks give it a powerful deity of its very own. A maiden voyage sings with a kind of mystical vibration. But what exactly is the magic of water, and what does it do to us? It's a mystery. When we peer into a lake, river, or ocean, we find that water encourages a particular kind of reverie. Perhaps its depths can enhance our consciousness even more if, instead of just looking, we get in and swim. We jump into that water and find ourselves in a curious liminal space. Here we are, suspended yet moving, floating yet ever in danger of sinking. And if we swim with the current instead of fighting against it, we find a momentary state, one of motion and yet paradoxical stillness, that is flow. Flow is what the groundbreaking Hungarian psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi explains as the state in which people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. The experience of said activity, swimming, say, or playing music, is so entirely enjoyable, he says, that people will do it even at great cost for the sheer sake of doing it. I think of frigid waters, crack of dawn workouts, shoulder injuries, all the money I've spent on bikinis. Nearly 3 decades ago, Csikszentmihalyi was the first to use the word flow to describe the experience of being so totally immersed that the self seems to fall away, along with any awareness of the passage of time. Every action, movement, and thought follows inevitably from the previous one, like playing jazz, he writes. This kind of effortless, deeply engaged concentration is joyful. For me, actually getting into the water to chase that ecstatic state of mind has a double appeal. It's 2 kinds of immersion experienced at once.
I love that. And it made me wonder, I'll ask more of a craft question. We hear a lot in this book about how you experience flow when you're in the water. I wondered if you experienced flow as a writer when you were writing this book.
I did. And it was also strange when I was writing this section of the book, which is stands out from the rest of the book, right? It is a much more meditative, internal, literary kind of exploring poets, exploring psychology, and it's kind of a more it's like I said, it's an elusive sort of ideas section. I would get in the pool or the ocean and I would swim around, and then I would say to myself, what am I thinking about right now? Because I wanted to kind of pinpoint it or pin it down and be able to talk about it in a way that I could then write about. And so it was like trying to enter the state of flow while swimming. Mm-hmm. And then it's weird because you sort of have to be consciously aware of what's happening, but also letting your brain wander around. And then sitting down to write about it. It's like it was a very strange. I would try to kind of seize upon like a sensory moment, like the water, felt in a particular way, or the light was coming down in a particular way, and seize upon like a specific detail. And then I would kind of use that to seed a passage that I was writing. And I think I did flow. I would take these little fragments from the swims themselves, the experience of the swims, and use them as sort of takeoff points to write about that. And they did take me, translating that. They did take me into a flow state of writing, because I could put myself back in that place, back into that flow state, and then just kind of let myself describe it. Like, it was sort of like my brain had already gone through it or experienced it. And so to write about it was to kind of try to trace that moment. I don't know. I hope that it wasn't just complete gobbledygook, but it was like how I kind of tried to have some sense of, again, because it's kind of circling back to the beginning of our conversation today, Eliza, which was, I really felt that it was very important to include in a book about swimming some sense of what it's like to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's hard to do that. I think it's hard to write about things we do so often and as habit in a fresh and compelling way. And so it was very important to me to root those passages in specifics and specific experiences and specific swims and specific people and specific stories, because I didn't want it to just be this, this sort of amorphous discussion of something that didn't really give you facts. I wanted the science. I wanted the the stories. I wanted the adventures, and I wanted the feeling of place and the traditions. And so I anchored all of this liquidy stuff in the specifics as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of things. I think writing about swimming, it's hard to write about swimming. It's like writing about music, and how to capture in writing something that is so sensory.
Right.
And I mean, just when I think about your book, it's super sensory. It's immersive. There's a swelling to it that reminds me of swimming, and I think that's what makes it such an enjoyable read, in addition to just all the fascinating things that we get to learn.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
So we're starting to get some questions coming in. I'll read them to Bonnie. So we have one in from Kathleen King. She's one of my colleagues at the Oxford American. Thank you, Kathleen, for asking a question. She said, when you said meditation and water are wedded together, it made me think of the experience of sitting and looking at water, but not being able to enter it for some reason. And I think I know what Kathleen is talking about, because I know her view from her back door and the beautiful pond that she gets to look at. And so the question is, what do you think that separation inspires of, I guess?
You mean the sort of longing?
I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, so I will start by saying that even looking at and listening to water without getting in it does something to our brains, and so that there's been quite a bit of research about how our brains respond to like the sounds of rushing water or flowing water. And again, that's stuff that evolutionarily is sort of hardwired in us. And so the water sounds, I mean, think about like rolling ocean waves, white noise machines and stuff like that, and white noise sleep soundtracks that are supposed to be calming, very much often tied to water. And to look at it, to be in its presence, to listen to it, it has such a calming effect on us, activates certain brain waves that are associated with relaxation, but also creativity. So that's I think an interesting way to contemplate your question, because even if we can't get into it, and maybe we would long to, this simply being around it is an invitation to have our brains move into a different space. And I think that a lot of people know that intuitively to be true, even though they haven't really thought about it in that way. And I'm sure when you look at your water in your backyard, that you know that if you think about it, that it means a little break from whatever it is that you're doing.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. So a couple of questions that have come in from two different folks that are related in a way, so I'll ask them together. The first question is, where has been your favorite place to swim? And in particular, asking if you've ever gone swimming in the Gulf of Mexico, which that's a kind of a touch point. A lot of people here go swimming there. So it's a favorite place to swim. And then second, imagine it's the end of your life and you only have one more swim that you could take. Where would you swim? So favorite swim, aspirational swim.
That's brutal. I can't choose one. I have gone swimming in the Gulf of Mexico and in Florida. I feel like, I really love warm water because it is so relaxing. I love Hawaii specifically because the water there is it's probably not as warm as in the Gulf of Mexico and Florida in the summertime, but it is warm, and it is, in a place where it is warm there. The sort of ambient temperature is warm, and so it's just like this lush, very relaxing experience. I think cold water swimming, like if I'm going to be swimming for exercise, say I go in for a swim, I get very hot, and so it's not that pleasant for me. I like to be swimming in that warm water. But if I'm just going for a swim because it's beautiful and I want to be in a place, like absolutely I love warm water because you can stay in it longer. Like I love to surf in warm water because you could surf for hours and hours and you don't care. And it's just when you get tired. I mean, I think it's the difference between like feeling you're hitting your limit and your body being unable to function as well in a shorter period of time. And so I think it just depends on, but because I love the clarity and the awakeness that cold water can bring. And I also love this kind of, this loose, meditative, relaxing quality to warm water too.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Here's one. Are women better than men at swimming in cold water?
I think women have a higher pain threshold and tolerance than men. And that is something that generally I think is accepted. And so I don't know if I think that would translate to cold water swimming. I know a lot of female cold water swimmers. Mm-hmm. I also know quite a few men, but I feel like the women actually don't complain about it as much, but that could be, there's many reasons for that. So take from that what you will. But there are a lot of, swimmers, especially distance, long distance marathon swimmers, open water swimmers, the time, like to be able to do that, to tolerate it, and the time is, as the distances go longer, it's not, the gap closes. There's not like there's no gender gap there.
Got it. Okay, question from Jennifer. Your book is a great oasis itself and a call to a new commitment to water and practices of engagement. Can you tell us what is next for you in terms of writing and water work?
I love that question, and I love that it's Jennifer Fish. Hi, Jennifer. We talked, we corresponded a little bit. I actually have a children's book coming out next spring called Sarah and the Big Wave, and it is about the first woman to surf Mavericks, which is a huge surf break here in Northern California. And it was such a wonderful project to do in the wake of this one, in the wake of Why We Swim, because it was shifting gears to be, it's a picture book for kids, and it was just wonderful to tell a story about an incredible pioneer in surfing who's just a badass. And so I had done a cover story on big wave women surfers for California Sunday Magazine, and then the picture book came from there. I could see a question about this picture here. It's by the artist Tom Killian, and who is a pretty well-known Northern California artist, and he does incredible, this is in Big Sur, but he does really beautiful, very iconic images of Northern California, so I recommend his work, obviously. It's a nice backdrop to talking about swimming.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any other questions? I think we're at we got 5 minutes to go. Well, I will ask one more question then, and keep an eye out if someone wants to jump in. So I'm guessing that most people tuning in right now are swimmers. They've had positive experiences with swimming, but maybe not everyone. And some people may have had scary experiences with swimming or lack of opportunities to swim. And I guess it's thinking that we live in a world where our public pool is back open. What is your advice for people who are interested in swimming but maybe nervous about swimming?
It's such a great question, and I think at every level, whether you are just starting to swim, I mean, maybe you've never felt comfortable enough in the water as and then now as an adult want to learn to swim, or that you just want to get better at swimming and more comfortable in different conditions. I think it's so important to find a good teacher who understands what it is that you're afraid of, and what you want to accomplish. And so have a conversation about that, because then you will trust that person to kind of take you through to whatever it is that you want to do, whether it's that you want to just start swimming like as a regular practice, in a pool, or that you want to, learn how to become more comfortable in the ocean. Like even if you're not like doing big open water swims, that you want to know how to conduct yourself safely, like in the waves and the shore break with your kids. I just think that to understand, you have to be really brave to do it. I think, especially as an adult, because it's hard. Like so many of the fears around swimming get so ossified over time, and it becomes like a real something that is actually a lot of things that happen to I think sort of more wary swimmers is that they've been like had a traumatic experience in their past, and so they kind of have to like understand what it was that they were scared of, and understand that they're perfectly capable of learning how to handle themselves safely, whatever the condition is. And so I think that's the biggest thing. Like it's a psychological thing. It's not that you will physically be able to do it no matter what. It's just understanding the fear and then finding a great teacher who you can trust to kind of help you through it.
Well, that seems like a good way to end our conversation, and I'll send my hopes out to everyone that I hope your swimming goals are fulfilled, whatever those are.
Me too.
Well, Bonnie, thank you so much for talking with us at the Six Bridges Book Festival. Thank you to the Central Arkansas Library System for organizing this and for being flexible in such a difficult year. And thank you to everyone, no matter where you are, for tuning in. I hope
Thank you all. And thank you to Wordsworth Books. Please support our local bookstores.
Yes, please go purchase this beautiful book and get a signed book plate from Bonnie. And enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.